Picture this. It's late 2000, yeah? The world is still waiting to find out if Y2K was just a very expensive false alarm, Napster is teaching record labels that their business model is basically fucked, and in a Chicago loft studio, two brilliant but increasingly incompatible musical minds are about to create one of the greatest albums of the 2000s, while simultaneously trying not to murder each other in the process. This is the story of Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, the album that proved you could get dropped by your record label for making a masterpiece, that accidentally predicted 9/11 in the creepiest possible way, and that turned a heated creative argument into the most influential piece of American indie rock since R.E.M. stopped caring about being cool. But first, let's talk about how spectacularly this whole thing could have gone wrong. By 2000, Wilco had evolved from Uncle Tupelo's alt-country ashes into something more ambitious and experimental, largely thanks to Jeff Tweedy's partnership with multi-instrumentalist Jay Bennett. Their previous album, Summerteeth, 1999, had been a lush orchestral pop masterpiece that sounded like what would happen if the Beach Boys had grown up listening to Pavement instead of Chuck Berry. Bennett loved Summerteeth. He wanted to make Summerteeth 2 Electric Boogaloo, bigger orchestrations, more layers, maximum wall of sound, Phil Spector maximalism. He had visions of heavy metal drummer being the template for an entire album of retro-futuristic pop perfection. This was a man who could play about 15 instruments and wasn't shy about proving it on every track. Tweedy, meanwhile, was having what you might charitably call artistic growth, or less charitably call a complete aesthetic nervous breakdown. He'd been listening to a lot of experimental music, Sonic Youth, Stereolab, Krautrock, and was becoming obsessed with the idea that Wilco needed to strip everything back, go minimal, get abstract. He wanted space in the music, not more stuff cluttering it up. This creative tension might have remained manageable if not for the arrival of Jim O'Rourke, the experimental musician-producer who'd been a member of Sonic Youth and had his fingers in every interesting musical pie in America. O'Rourke was invited to mix one track, I Am Trying to Break Your Heart, and the result was so compelling that Tweedy immediately knew this was the direction the album needed to go. O'Rourke's approach was counterintuitive. Instead of adding more layers like Bennett wanted, he started taking them away. I took away 80% of the noise on the record, which is the reverse of what people expect of me, O'Rourke later explained. He was stripping the songs down to their essential elements, letting the melodies breathe while adding strategic touches of electronic manipulation and found sound weirdness. The sessions, documented in Sam Jones' fly-on-the-wall documentary I Am Trying to Break Your Heart, became a masterclass in creative dysfunction. Bennett, who'd been the band's de facto producer and arranger, suddenly found his role being usurped by this experimental interloper. The stress was so intense that arguments between Tweedy and Bennett would sometimes end with Tweedy literally running to the bathroom to vomit from the tension. Here's where things got really ugly. As the sessions progressed, Bennett began to realize he was being systematically excluded from the process. Tweedy would work on songs with O'Rourke while Bennett wasn't around, making decisions that fundamentally altered tracks Bennett had spent months crafting. Bennett, feeling increasingly paranoid and erratic, started working alone on his own mixes, creating elaborate alternate versions of songs that Tweedy wouldn't even listen to. The title Jesus Etc. came from one of these fraught mixing sessions. The song was originally called Jesus Don't Cry, but when Bennett was burning a CD of the track late one night, he got lazy and simply wrote Jesus Etc. on the disc. The abbreviated title stuck, becoming one of the album's most beloved songs. The breaking point came over something seemingly insignificant, a 10-second transition from Ashes of American Flags to Heavy Metal Drummer. Bennett tried to explain the technical nuances of different approaches, while Tweedy, exhausted and frustrated, just wanted the problem solved. The argument, captured in the documentary, reveals two men who can no longer communicate despite sharing the same creative goals. But Bennett's contributions to the album were substantial and often uncredited. Much of the music, some of the lyrics, pump organs, Wurlitzers, pianos, synths, electric guitars, banjos, drum sounds, background vocals, you get it. Meanwhile, drummer Ken Coomer was dealing with his own set of problems.
Ken Coomer had been with Wilco since their formation, but by 2000 he was increasingly frustrated with the band's finances. Despite grossing over $1 million a year, individual members were making around $30,000 to $70,000 a year after expenses. And, more importantly, he wasn't connecting with Tweedy's new musical direction. When Tweedy started collaborating with Chicago drummer Glenn Kotchell, a classically trained percussionist who could handle both experimental textures and rock rhythms, the writing was on the wall.
The drummer switch happened mid-album, with Coomer playing on some tracks and Coach on others. It was handled, by all accounts, terribly. Manager Tony Margherita made the call to fire Coomer rather than Tweedy doing it himself. Coomer and Tweedy haven't spoken since, which tells you everything you need to know about how that conversation went. But Coach's arrival was transformative. Where Coomer was a solid, straightforward rock drummer, Coach brought a percussionist sensibility to unusual sounds and textures. His work on tracks like I'm Trying to Break Your Heart and Poor Places added layers of complexity that felt organic rather than cluttered. By the time the album was completed in early 2001, the relationship between Tweedy and Bennett was irreparably damaged. Bennett was fired shortly after the album's completion, though not before contributing substantially to what many consider Wilco's masterpiece. His piano work on unreleased tracks and his instrumental arrangements throughout the album prove he was operating at the height of his creative powers, even as his relationship with the band disintegrated. The album that emerged from these sessions was unlike anything Wilco had done before. Songs like Jesus, Etc. combined gorgeous melodies with lyrics that seemed to anticipate the emotional landscape of post-9/11 America. Quote, "Tall buildings shake, voices escape singing sad, sad songs." The fact that these lyrics were written months before September 11th makes them feel eerily prescient rather than exploitative. The title track samples from the Conet Project, a collection of recordings from Cold War-era number stations, shortwave radio broadcasts of coded messages that were never officially acknowledged by any government. A robotic voice repeating Yankee Hotel Foxtrot provided an otherworldly backdrop that perfectly captured the album's themes of communication breakdown and paranoid uncertainty. Then came the label drama. Reprise Records, Wilco's home since their formation, was going through corporate upheaval following the AOL-Time Warner merger. President Howie Klein, a Wilco supporter, was fired and replaced by David Kahn, who took one listen to Yankee Hotel Foxtrot and decided it was unmarketable. No obvious singles, too experimental, not commercial enough. A&R Bap Mio Vukovic was assigned to make the album more radio-friendly, suggesting changes that would have fundamentally altered its character. When Wilco refused to compromise, Reprise dropped them, leading to one of the most publicized label-artist disputes of the early 2000s. But here's the beautiful irony. Getting dropped was the best thing that could have happened to Wilco. The David versus Goliath narrative turned them from cult heroes into mainstream darlings. Music journalists and fans rallied around the band, portraying them as artists standing up to corporate Philistines. The controversy generated more press coverage than any traditional marketing campaign could have achieved. Wilco bought the masters back from Reprise, initially for $50,000, though the label eventually gave them away for free to avoid bad publicity. Warner Music essentially paid for the same album twice, which manager Tony Margherita later called the coup of all time. But before the official release, Wilco did something radical for 2001. They streamed the entire album for free on their website on September 18, 2001. This was before the era of streaming services when most people were still buying CDs and downloading individual songs from Napster. The free stream drew over 50,000 visitors in a single day, and by the time Yankee Hotel Foxtrot got its official release in April 2002, fans were already singing along at concerts. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The album's themes of alienation, communication breakdown, and American anxiety resonated deeply with a nation still processing the trauma of 9/11. Songs like Ashes of American Flags felt like transmissions from a traumatized future, while Jesus, Etc. provided comfort in the form of gorgeous, melancholic beauty. The album hit number 13 on the Billboard 200, Wilco's highest chart position to date, and eventually sold over 600,000 copies, making it their most successful release. Critics were unanimous in their praise,
with Yankee Hotel Foxtrot topping the Village Voice's prestigious Paz and Jop poll for 2002 and appearing on virtually every year-end list worth mentioning.
The success vindicated Tweedy's vision, while simultaneously highlighting the tragedy of Bennett's departure. The various unreleased versions and alternate mixes that have surfaced over the years, collected most comprehensively in the 2022 Super Deluxe reissue, show just how many different directions the album could have gone. Bennett's maximalist approach might have produced something equally brilliant, but completely different. The 9/11 coincidences only added to the album's mystique. Beyond Jesus, etc., songs throughout the album felt like they'd been written in response to the attacks, rather than months before them. The whole record seemed to capture the anxiety and uncertainty of turn-of-the-millennium America in ways that no one could have planned. O'Rourke's role in shaping the final product can't be overstated. His decision to subtract rather than add, to find the songs underneath Bennett's elaborate arrangements while adding his own subtle electronic textures, created something that felt both timeless and completely contemporary. It was indie rock that incorporated elements of ambient music, krautrock, and experimental composition without ever sounding academic or pretentious. Most importantly, the reprise controversy transformed Wilco from a cult band into legitimate stars. The narrative of artists versus corporations, creativity versus commerce, resonated far beyond the indie rock world. They became symbols of artistic integrity in an industry increasingly driven by focus groups and market research. Looking back, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot feels like the moment when indie rock grew up, when it stopped being just an alternative to mainstream rock and became something genuinely innovative and culturally significant. It was the sound of a band pulling itself apart while creating its masterpiece, proving that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most difficult circumstances. And honestly, in an age when most bands are afraid to take the kind of creative risks that might alienate their fan base, Wilco's willingness to burn everything down in pursuit of their artistic vision feels more radical than ever. That's basically everything. And somehow it's still not enough to capture how perfect this messy, contentious, accidentally prophetic album really is. Hey, if you liked the video, subscribe. The algorithm monster needs feeding, and I'd rather be your engagement than my soul. Also, leave a like. I'm needy. See ya.